Everyone talks about embracing the shadow, but almost no one notices the silent trick the mind plays during the process. What if your shadow isn't your enemy, but your double? And what if every time you tried to fix yourself, you were only feeding it? There is a part of you that watches when you lie, when you envy, when you pretend to be good. It hides behind your smile. It whispers when you dream. And though you call it darkness, it calls itself truth. Tonight, we descend into the forgotten chambers of Carl Jung's shadow. Because the real secret of shadow work is not what it heals, it's what it reveals. Most people think they know what shadow work means. They hear the phrase and imagine confronting their negative emotions, their anger, their jealousy, their fear. They think of journaling, meditation, maybe even confession. The idea of shining light upon the darker aspects of themselves. But this is only the surface, the faint reflection of something far deeper and far more dangerous. The modern mind has reduced Jung's most profound insight into a self-help slogan, and in doing so, it has lost the very essence of what Jung was trying to show us, that the shadow is not simply the bad part of you, it is the forgotten part of you. When Jung spoke of the shadow, he did not mean the collection of small moral failings we hide from others. He was describing a vast psychic force, a living counterpart to the conscious ego, formed out of everything we have rejected, denied, and exiled from our awareness. It is not just your anger or envy. It is your potential, your instinct, your power, your repressed creativity. All the unlived life waiting in the dark corners of your being. But we do not want to hear that. It's far easier to label the shadow as something dirty or wrong, something to be cleansed. And so, shadow work becomes another ego project, another attempt to improve, to purify, to feel enlightened. People say they are doing shadow work, but what they are truly doing is tidying their self-image, rearranging their inner furniture so it looks acceptable under spiritual lighting. Yet the shadow cannot be managed like a bad habit. It is not a checklist of flaws to fix. It is a force that demands recognition, not correction. When you turn it into an exercise of self-improvement, you betray its nature, because the shadow doesn't want to be improved. It wants to be understood. Think of the dreams that haunt you, the impulses that scare you, the emotions that suddenly rise and take control. These are not intruders from the outside. They are fragments of yourself returning from exile. Each one carries a piece of truth you refuse to live. Jung warned that anything we repress does not disappear. It simply moves underground and gathers power. The more we deny it, the stronger it becomes. And when the pressure grows unbearable, it bursts into our lives through anger, projection, addiction, or chaos. But here's where the misinterpretation becomes dangerous. People believe that confronting their shadow means venting their anger, expressing their pain, or writing out their sadness, as if awareness alone were enough to dissolve it. Yet the real work begins after awareness. The shadow must be integrated, not merely acknowledged. It must be invited into the circle of the self. That means taking responsibility for it, not excusing it, not labeling it as trauma alone, but seeing it as an equal partner in your psychic evolution. Integration is not pleasant. It is not about feeling better. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness is terrifying because it demands that you stop pretending to be only light. You must face the fact that every virtue hides a vice, every ideal casts a shadow, every saint contains a sinner. The ego wants purity. The soul wants truth. That's why true shadow work feels more like death than healing. The death of your illusions, the collapse of your persona, the exposure of what you truly are beneath the masks. Jung saw that most people would rather remain fragmented than confront this truth. It's easier to live with half a soul than to endure the fire of transformation. And so, we turn the shadow into something manageable, something fashionable, something we can talk about without trembling. We domesticate it. We make it spiritual. But the shadow does not obey such taming. It waits. It watches. It returns through the cracks of our control. Look around you. The internet, the self-help world, the spiritual influencers. You will see people preaching shadow work while still running from their own unconscious. They talk of love and light, but their words carry the bitter aftertaste of repression. Because the more you deny your darkness, the more it leaks into your light. You start using kindness as manipulation, empathy as control, spirituality as disguise. Jung called this the shadow of the spiritual man. The hidden arrogance that grows when one believes they are beyond the shadow. And here lies the real tragedy. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your teacher. Every emotion you suppress, every impulse you label as bad, every image that makes you uncomfortable. These are messengers of the psyche. They speak in the language of dreams, symbols and archetypes. They are not telling you you're evil. They are showing you where you are incomplete. The shadow is the mirror that reflects everything you've refused to love in yourself. But because people have misunderstood it, they fear their own reflection. They seek to purify rather than to unite, to overcome rather than to embrace. And this misunderstanding feeds a quiet despair, a sense that no matter how much we meditate, journal, or heal, something is still missing. That missing piece is the shadow calling from beneath the surface, whispering that you cannot reach the light by denying the dark. Jung once said that the shadow is 90% pure gold. What he meant was that within your darkness lies your power, your vitality, your authenticity. The parts of yourself you've hidden away are not just wounds. They are gateways to depth, to creativity, to true individuality. The reason shadow work feels frightening is because it threatens the small identity we've built to survive. To meet your shadow is to meet yourself without disguise. And few people are ready for that. That is why the modern interpretation of shadow work remains shallow. It sells comfort instead of confrontation. It promises light without the descent. But Jung's path always began with descent. The journey into the underworld of the psyche, where the soul meets its forgotten faces. It is in that darkness that integration begins, not in the polished light of self-analysis. The misinterpretation of the shadow is not just a misunderstanding of psychology. It is a symptom of our collective fear of depth. We live on the surface of ourselves, terrified to look below. Yet what waits below is not hell. It is wholeness in disguise. Jung's shadow was never about fixing what's broken. It was about reclaiming what was lost. The darkness you fear most is simply the part of you that has been waiting the longest to be seen. There is something almost divine about the ego's intelligence, a brilliance so cunning that it can convince you that you are awakening, even while you remain asleep. When Jung explored the labyrinth of the psyche, he found that the ego is not an enemy to destroy but a trickster to recognize. It wears masks infinite in number, each one reflecting a role, a virtue, a dream. And in the process of shadow work, this trickster becomes most dangerous. Because, just when you think you are facing your darkness, you may actually be staring into a mirror polished by the ego itself. The ego doesn't want integration. It wants survival. Its greatest fear is annihilation, the loss of its control over who you think you are. So when you begin shadow work, when you turn inward to confront what you've repressed, the ego joins you. But it doesn't join as a humble guide. It disguises itself as your therapist, your spiritual self, your higher consciousness. It whispers, yes, let's heal. But what it means is, let's heal in a way that doesn't threaten my throne. That is the first deception. The ego pretends to help you descend into the unconscious, but it secretly draws the map itself. It decides which parts of the shadow you're allowed to face and which must remain hidden. It permits you to confront your mild irritations, your manageable fears, your socially acceptable flaws, but not your raw hunger for power, not your secret resentments, not your craving to dominate, to possess, to destroy. Those are too dangerous. Those expose the ego's illusion of purity, so it locks them away and gives you a safer version of shadow work, one that flatters rather than transforms. You can see this everywhere, the language of healing turned into the language of pride. I'm so self-aware now. I've integrated my darkness. I'm above projection. But the moment you declare your enlightenment, the shadow smiles, because that declaration itself, that certainty that you are beyond illusion, is the ego's greatest illusion. Jung knew that the deeper one ventures into the psyche, the more humility becomes essential. He called it the path of individuation, a process not of becoming special, but of becoming real. The ego hates being real. Reality exposes its fragility. That's why it hides behind grand spiritual ideas and noble causes. It tells you that you're doing shadow work to help others, to heal humanity, to spread light. But often, beneath these beautiful intentions lies a darker motive, the hunger to feel superior, to be seen as awakened, to avoid your own pain by fixing the pain of others. The ego can turn even the journey inward into a performance outward. And so, as you meditate, journal, or analyze your dreams, the ego subtly shapes your discoveries. It translates them into something safe, digestible, flattering. It allows small breakthroughs but avoids real surrender. It says, yes, look at your anger, but doesn't let you see how that anger feeds your sense of importance. It says, yes, accept your sadness, but hides the pride that clings to being a victim. Every insight becomes a new disguise. Every revelation becomes a new identity. The ego transforms even pain into prestige. This deception is not malicious, it is instinctive. The ego was built to protect you, to give shape to the chaos of your inner world. But protection easily becomes imprisonment. The same walls that kept you safe now keep you small. The same identity that helped you survive now prevents you from evolving. Jung understood this paradox. The ego must exist for consciousness to function, yet it must also be transcended for wholeness to emerge. It is both the doorway and the lock. Imagine this for a moment, that every thought you have about who you are, every virtue you claim, every moral boundary you defend, might be part of the ego's performance. The ego is an artist, painting the story of me. It will even use the language of shadow work to strengthen its story. When you say, I'm facing my darkness, the ego quietly adds, I am the one brave enough to face it. When you say, I've forgiven those who hurt me, it whispers, I am the one noble enough to forgive. It never stops speaking in the first person. It cannot. Jung compared this process to alchemy, the transformation of base matter into gold. But in the psychological sense, the base matter is the ego's illusion, and to transform it, it must first melt. That melting feels like chaos. It feels like death. The ego interprets it as danger and rushes to intervene, building new defenses disguised as progress. It says, you're healing, when really you're hiding behind a new persona. The healed one, the wise one, the conscious one. This is why true shadow work often feels humiliating. It reveals how many of your noble actions are rooted in fear, how much of your kindness masks manipulation, how often your morality hides judgment. The ego cannot bear this exposure. It prefers the comfort of half-truths. It says, I'm doing the work, but refuses to ask, who is the one doing it? Because if that question is followed deeply enough, the I begins to dissolve, and that is what the ego cannot allow. Jung believed that the real danger of psychology was inflation. When the ego identifies with the self, the divine center of the psyche, when this happens, a person begins to feel godlike, above others, beyond their shadow. They mistake temporary insight for enlightenment. They stop questioning, stop listening. The ego has successfully hijacked the soul's journey. It now wears the mask of the self, radiant, confident, invincible. While the true self waits silently beneath, you can recognize this in subtle ways. Whenever you feel certain that you've arrived, the ego has claimed victory. Whenever you feel superior for understanding something others don't, the ego has stepped forward. Whenever your spiritual growth becomes a story to display, the shadow hides behind applause. The deception is so complete that you might not even notice it. And that is why Jung emphasized the need for continuous self-observation, not from judgment, but from awareness. The ego cannot be destroyed by force. It must be seen. The moment you truly observe it without trying to fix or justify it, it begins to lose its hold. But until that moment, it will use every tool, every philosophy, every practice to remain the hero of your story. Even humility can become its disguise. Look how humble I am. Even surrender can become its weapon. I've already let go. The ego's deception is not a mistake in the system. It is the system. It's the veil that allows consciousness to exist at all. Jung did not ask us to kill the ego. He asked us to make it conscious, to see it for what it is, a necessary illusion, a bridge to something greater. But until you recognize its voice, it will continue to speak for you, convincing you that you are awake, while quietly keeping you asleep. There is a shadow that does not belong to you alone. It does not whisper in your dreams or hide behind your childhood wounds. It lives in the air between us, a vast, invisible fog made of everything humanity has refused to see in itself. Carl Jung called this the collective shadow. It is the sum of our unacknowledged darkness, not personal but shared, and it moves through the world like a silent contagion. We think our shadows are private, yet the truth is far more unsettling. Our inner denials shape our outer reality. What we repress within ourselves, we create collectively, as politics, as culture, as war. Look at history and you will see the shadow at work. Every society claims to stand for peace, freedom, morality, and progress. Yet behind every golden banner waves a darker flag: conquest, exploitation, domination. Nations project their dissound impulses onto others. One calls itself civilized and names the other barbaric. One calls itself righteous and brands the other evil. It is the same ancient pattern repeating itself. A collective ego seeking purity by disowning its own corruption. Jung saw this clearly during the rise of fascism in Europe. He warned that when a people refuse to face their collective guilt, their repressed darkness takes form in leaders and movements that embody what they most fear. The tyrant outside is born from the denial within. You can see it today, too. The collective shadow has not weakened, it has become more sophisticated. It hides behind screens, hashtags, and causes. It speaks the language of virtue while feeding on division. We project our own aggression into political opponents, our envy into celebrities, our hunger for power into the systems we claim to hate. The internet, that mirror of humanity's unconscious, becomes the modern Colosseum where the shadow performs its rituals. Every outrage, every cancellation, every moral crusade is part of the same psychological dance. The attempt to destroy externally what we refuse to recognize internally. The collective shadow does not just live in governments or institutions. It lives in our families, our schools, our religions, our ideologies. It is in the way we raise children to suppress their emotions, to hide their wildness, to wear masks of goodness. We teach them to be polite, to be successful, to be normal, and in doing so, we teach them to bury the raw, instinctual life that once connected us to nature and the sacred. As Jung wrote, civilization is a thin layer over a seething mass of barbarism. That barbarism is not evil in itself. It is the unintegrated energy of life, chaotic, creative, primal. When we repress it, it returns in distorted forms: violence, addiction, corruption, despair. The frightening truth is that the collective shadow is not an abstract idea. It breathes through each of us. Every time you demonize another group, mock another belief, or justify your hatred in the name of goodness, you feed it. The shadow thrives on moral certainty. It loves the phrase, "I would never do that," because the moment you say it, you separate yourself from the possibility of evil, and that separation is where evil grows. Jung warned that the greatest danger is not the monsters outside, but the man who believes he has none within. Even our collective pursuit of perfection, technological, moral, or spiritual, hides a shadow. The more we seek to create a flawless world, the more intolerant we become of imperfection. We create systems that promise equality but breed resentment, religions that promise salvation but condemn difference, technologies that promise connection but amplify isolation. The collective shadow turns progress into performance. It makes us worship light so blindly that we cannot see the darkness gathering just behind it. In every age, this shadow finds new masks. In the ancient world, it was projected onto demons and witches. In the modern world, it hides behind algorithms and ideologies. We tell ourselves we are more enlightened now, but our projections have only evolved with our language. We no longer burn witches, we cancel them. We no longer worship idols, we follow influencers. We no longer fight holy wars with swords, we fight them with words. The form changes, but the psyche remains the same. Humanity still seeks purity by scapegoating what it cannot integrate. You might think you are immune to this, that you are too aware to fall into collective projection. But the collective shadow is seductive because it offers belonging. It says, you are one of the good ones. It gives you a tribe, a cause, a target. And once you have an enemy, your ego feels safe. You can pour all your denied aggression into that enemy and call it justice. You can project your own fear of insignificance onto those you judge and call it truth. This is why collective shadow movements always feel righteous, because they borrow the language of light to justify their darkness. Jung believed that healing the collective shadow begins with the individual. The world changes only when enough people withdraw their projections, when they dare to see the evil they attribute to others within themselves. But this is not easy. The collective shadow is comfortable because it spares us personal responsibility. It allows us to remain victims of systems instead of participants in their creation. It's easier to say, they, we. It's easier to fight the outer war than to face the inner one. This is why every great moral collapse in history has been accompanied by collective blindness. Ordinary people doing ordinary things, believing they are good, unaware of the unconscious forces moving through them. Jung called it possession by the archetype, when a group becomes taken over by a psychic energy larger than itself. In those moments, the individual vanishes into the crowd, conscience dissolves into ideology, and the shadow rules unchecked. The Holocaust, the Inquisition, the Crusades, the witch trials, all born from the same pattern of projection. Why are the righteous, and they are the evil? Today, the same possession occurs in subtler forms, in political polarization, in online outrage, in cultural wars dressed as moral battles. Each side mirrors the other's hatred, each accusing the other of blindness while staring into the same abyss. Jung wrote that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego, personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. That effort is precisely what the collective refuses to make. We want simple villains, not mirrors. We want purity, not paradox. The collective shadow grows stronger every time we look away, every judgment, every label, every certainty that divides from them feeds it. Yet Jung saw hope in the same darkness. For if the shadow represents what we've rejected, then facing it means reclaiming our forgotten wholeness as a species. But to do that, we must first recognize that the world's chaos is not separate from our inner conflict. What we call evil out there is the unhealed shadow in here, multiplied by millions of minds unwilling to see their reflection. When most people hear the term shadow work, they imagine a process of self-improvement, a checklist of flaws to confront, habits to correct, traits to polish. Journals are filled with confessions, meditations are performed diligently, and social media is awash with declarations of personal growth. Yet Carl Jung's vision of shadow work was never about becoming a better version of yourself. it was about something far more profound: wholeness. The forgotten purpose of shadow work is not to create a life that appears better on the surface, but to reconcile the fractured depths of your psyche, to reunite the light and the dark, to awaken the parts of yourself that have been exiled, denied, and dismissed. The modern mind resists this idea because wholeness is not comfortable. Improvement is linear. It has a roadmap. It allows you to measure progress, to congratulate yourself along the way. Wholeness, on the other hand, is a confrontation with contradiction, a recognition that within you exists the capacity for both beauty and destruction, tenderness and violence, love and cruelty. It is a reconciliation of opposites, an alchemical process in which the raw, chaotic energies of the unconscious are not eliminated, but transformed into consciousness. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward the self. But the self is not the ego, nor is it an idealized version of your personality. It is the totality of your being, the sacred center where every shadow finds its place. Shadow work begins with recognition, but recognition is only the first step. Many people stop there. They name their fears, they acknowledge their anger. They list the traits they wish to change, and they believe they have done the work. But Jung warned that this is a superficial engagement. Naming the shadow is not the same as integrating it. Integration requires surrender. It requires the courage to look beyond morality, beyond social approval, beyond your sense of identity. You must allow the parts of yourself that frighten you most to take up residence in your conscious life. Only then can the fragmented psyche begin to reconcile with itself. The forgotten purpose of shadow work is revealed most clearly in dreams. Jung observed that dreams are the language of the unconscious, speaking in symbols, archetypes, and narratives that defy logic. A dream may show you a monster, a thief, a betrayer. But these figures are not outsiders. They are parts of yourself calling to be recognized. The shadow is never an enemy in dreams. It is a guide, a teacher, a messenger. It seeks union, not punishment. Yet few people know how to listen. We wake with fear, denial, or judgment, and the message is lost. The gold remains buried beneath our rational mind, waiting for the moment we can approach it without fear. The journey toward wholeness is not linear. It is cyclical, spiraling, unpredictable. Sometimes you feel close to integration, only to discover that the parts of yourself you thought you had mastered were merely disguised, waiting to re-emerge. The shadow is patient. It does not rush. It waits for true acknowledgement, for authentic surrender. And in this waiting, it teaches one of Jung's most difficult lessons, that the soul cannot be hurried, that transformation is an inner process, not an external project. Improvement has a timeline, wholeness does not. One of the reasons the purpose of shadow work is forgotten is the ego's resistance. The ego wants stories, heroes, progress, certainty. It wants to believe that we can ascend by learning techniques, adopting habits, and correcting flaws. Wholeness cannot be measured or displayed. It cannot be captured in a post, a photo, or a certificate. It is invisible to the world because it exists within the silent chambers of the psyche. The ego interprets this invisibility as failure, as stagnation, as insufficiency, and convinces you to stop, to seek easier paths, to return to superficial improvement. Yet Jung insisted that the ultimate goal is the integration of opposites. Light and dark, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, life and death. This is the sacred union that humans have sought in myth, alchemy, and religion for millennia. Every symbol of the archetype, from the alchemical king and queen to the mythic hero and shadow figure, points to the same truth. Wholeness is not obtained by eliminating darkness, but by making it conscious, by allowing it to live alongside the light. This union produces what Jung called the self, not the ego, not morality, not social conformity, but the authentic totality of being. Shadow work also challenges the illusion of control. When you face your shadow with the intent of wholeness, you discover that life cannot be reduced to formulas or plans. You encounter impulses, desires, fears, and instincts that do not conform to your will. You encounter contradictions, paradoxes, and ambiguities that resist neat resolution. And yet, it is precisely in this confrontation that the psyche grows. The shadow is the engine of transformation, and wholeness is the horizon toward which it drives the soul. This is why so many stop before they reach the true purpose. Improvement feels safer, wholeness feels like chaos. Acknowledging the shadow's guidance means surrendering the narrative you have built about yourself, letting go of pride, certainty, and self-justification. It means recognizing that what you have called flaws, failures, or darkness are not obstacles to overcome, but pieces of a hidden, sacred pattern. And it is only when these pieces are accepted, embraced, and allowed to speak that true individuation begins. The forgotten purpose of shadow work is ultimately about reclaiming what has been lost, the energy, creativity, and power that repression has buried. Every part of the shadow, when recognized and integrated, becomes a source of vitality. The anger that once destroyed can now protect. The desire that once consumed can now create. The fear that once paralyzed can now guide. Each confrontation with the shadow is an encounter with a hidden potential, a spark of life that was exiled by fear, morality, or social conditioning. Jung insisted that to ignore the shadow is to remain incomplete. Wholeness cannot be achieved by embracing only what is convenient, pleasant, or socially acceptable. It requires the courage to look into the darkest corners of the soul, to meet the exiled and rejected, and to allow them a place in consciousness. Only through this reconciliation can the psyche achieve balance, depth, and authenticity. Shadow work is therefore not about being good. It is not about being moral, successful, or admired. It is about being real. It is about facing the totality of your inner world and allowing every fragment to speak, to live, and to integrate. Wholeness is not a prize. It is the natural state of the human psyche when the exiled parts are recognized and embraced. It is the forgotten purpose that calls each of us into the hidden depths, asking us to stop polishing, stop improving, and start seeing. The shadow is not a puzzle to solve, nor a problem to fix. It is the hidden pulse of your own soul, the voice of what you have denied, and the mirror of what the world refuses to see. Every fear, every anger, every impulse you have hidden away carries a message that whispers of your untapped power, your unlived truth, and the wholeness that waits patiently beneath the surface. To confront the shadow is not to become perfect. It is to become real. It is to step into the darkness without armor, to listen without judgment, to let the exiled parts of yourself take their place at the center of your consciousness. It is to recognize that what you have called bad, or weak, or unworthy may actually be the spark that completes you. And beyond the personal, the shadow stretches into the collective. The hatred, the fear, the denial we see in the world is reflected within us. Until we face it in ourselves, it will continue to rise outside, shaping societies, fueling conflict, and whispering illusions of righteousness. The journey inward is also a journey outward. The path toward healing the self is inseparable from the path toward healing the world. Carl Jung did not give us a map of comfort or moral certainty. He gave us a mirror that is frightening, wild, and sacred. The shadow is the gatekeeper to the self, the doorway to wholeness, the quiet voice that refuses to be ignored. To meet it is to awaken, to descend into the depths of your own psyche, and to return transformed. So tonight, ask yourself, what part of your darkness have you sent away? What whispers have you silenced? And what might happen if you finally listened? For the shadow waits patiently, not to punish, but to complete you. The question is not whether you are ready. The question is whether you dare to see.